Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is Arlene Montevecchio, and I am the director of the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's College. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's a dreary night, but we will have some good stimulating discussion tonight and some fellowship after. So thank you for being here. I'd ask that you sign the sign-in sheet as it goes around. That's for our listserv, and also if you're a student, you may get an evaluation of learning outcomes sent your way. So please sign the sign-in sheet. And please silence your cell phones. Did I say that already? Please silence your cell phones. So just to tell you, the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's College was founded in 1984 with generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross, some of whom are here tonight, and some of the novices are here tonight. So we're delighted to have you. The Sisters are a global order with ministries around the world responding to the signs of the times and the needs that are present. They recently celebrated 50 years of ministry in Uganda, which is relevant as Father Emmanuel Katongole, our distinguished lecturer tonight, is a priest of the Archdiocese of Kampala in Uganda. He earned his PhD in philosophy from the Catholic University of Louvain, Belgium, and is the author of over half a dozen books, with his recent work out next month, Born from Lament, on the theology and politics of hope in Africa. We have a pamphlet out in the lobby with the new book on it, so please take that. Prior to joining the University of Notre Dame as Associate Professor of Theology and Peace Studies, Father Katongole served at Duke University and was the founding co-director of the Duke Divinity School's Center for Reconciliation. We are privileged indeed to have with us tonight Father Emmanuel Katongole to share with us Who Are My People? Christianity, Violence, and Identity Politics in Sub-Saharan Africa. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your words of welcome and introduction, and thank you for your invitation to me to be here this evening. What a joy, what an honor for me to be here, to be part of this lecture series, and to be here at St. Mary's College. And what a joy to see all of you this evening. Thank you for coming out this evening. I know there were many possibilities for you to be at this evening, and I'm very, very happy to see you. I know it's not a very warm evening, a lot of rain and cold. Driving here was dreary, so I would try to make it as less painful as I can. And I know I'm the only one standing between you and your beautiful homes and nice, comfortable living rooms or beds. So I'll try to do my best not to make this more painful. But thank you again, Ellen, for your invitation to be part of this 2017 lecture series on Called to Intervene, on Violence, Spirituality, and Solidarity. As I understand, the overall goal of these lecture series is to highlight the connections between solidarity and spirituality, especially in response to violence. As we respond to violence, and the ways in which violence can be transformed into non-violence, the ways in which hatred can be transformed into love, war transformed into peace. For the fact that we have violence does not mean that we are doomed to live in violence. So I'm very, very much honored to be part of this lecture series. What I would like to do this evening is to share and reflect on two stories from Africa. And I do so for two reasons. First of all, stories like these that I'm going to share, in a way, contribute to the way in which we understand Africa. They are important for the way in which we understand or view Africa. For when it comes to violence, it is true there is something like too much of violence in Africa at times. 1994, Rwanda, the genocide. 100 days, almost 1 million people killed. The fighting in Eastern Congo since 1996 until now, over 5.4 million people died. The newest country in Africa, South Sudan, in 2015 erupted in violence that has become more ethnically oriented now between Dinka and Nuer. Over 300,000 people have been killed. The violence that erupted in the Central African Republic in 2013 left over 200,000 people dead and millions of people fleeing their homes, especially Muslim brothers and sisters. This is what leads many, when they think about Africa, to think about Africa as a continent without hope, a hopeless continent. The Economist of 2000 captured that on its cover when it painted the picture of Africa and said the hopeless continent. Ever since I saw that image of the Economist, I've been committed to say, no, Africa is not a hopeless continent. I've been interested in proving that wrong. And so stories like these are important to confirm that Africa is not a hopeless continent, that Africa is actually filled with hope. And stories like these become the evidence of the hope that there is in Africa. The second reason why I would like to share these two stories is for us here. It is important as we think about our lives here, in America, in Indiana, in South Bend, at St. Mary's, as we face the realities of violence, of fear, of hatred, of discrimination, whether it is based on gender or race, we need stories that can inspire us to show that there is another way, to provide a lens of what it takes to transform fear into hope and hatred into peace. So that's why it's important to share stories, and I will share these two stories for that reason. And at the risk of jumping ahead of myself, getting ahead of myself, I want to say that in telling these two stories, I'm working at the intersection, or trying at least to bring together 4 interrelated notions which are at work in these stories. And the 4 notions are: 1, the excess of love. The excess of love, which reflects God's own excess of love, that is manifested by God's sending his Son, who dies on the cross, who continues that excess of love in the way that he reaches out especially to the weak, the sick, the poor, the marginalized. The excess of love. 2, tenderness. The excess of love is made possible, is cultivated, if you like, through an enlarging of the heart, which happens only through a tenderizing of the heart, a heart being made tender, and therefore tenderness. 3, compassion. The tenderness of the heart is at the same time the capacity for compassion. Compassion in its original Italian, Latin meaning, compassion, suffering with. Excess of love, tenderness, compassion. Number 4, a new community. A new community that emerges out of these four elements. What I would like to argue is that it's a similar notions of excess of love, of tenderness, of compassion, a new community. It's similar elements, notions that are at work in any attempt to respond to violence, hatred, or discrimination. It requires similar invitation from us to enter into the story of God's excess love. And that itself is an invitation into a revolution of tenderness, as Pope Francis calls it. And that itself is also made possible through an invitation to compassion, and whose goal, actually, is to create what Martin Luther King Jr. would call a beloved community. A community in which who are my people gets constantly to be redefined and expanded. So that's what I want to do this evening. And I want to do so through 2 stories. The first story is from the Central African Republic. The Central African Republic, a little bigger than the size of Texas, 4.5 million people, 15% of the population Muslim, 80% Christian, and 5% traditionalist. So it borders a number of these countries, as you can see here, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Congo-Brazzaville, Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, and South Sudan. A country that is very rich in resources, diamond, wood, gold, uranium, oil, but ironically also one of the poorest nations in the world. Number 42 out of 45 in the African continent. In 2012, so yeah, this is the map of the Central African Republic. In 2012, Seleka rebels, mostly operating in this north eastern region, with the support of rebels, militias from Sudan, from Chad, from Cameroon, took over the government, stormed the capital, so it kind of walked across the Central African Republic to the capital Bangui, deposed the president, and installed their own president. This area happens to be predominantly Muslim, so most of the militia, the fighters, were Muslim, and so went to the Bangui. They installed the first Muslim president of the country. The generals and fighters spanned out into the countryside and started harassing the population, and the population here is mostly Christian. Not only harassed them because of trying to loot their houses and property, but also for control of the area. Soon, the village populations in this area, which are mostly Christian, organized themselves into what was called the anti-Barak movement. The rebels are called Seleka, which means coalition, kind of bringing together a number of factions. The populations here organized themselves into what are called anti-Barak militia. The point of the anti-Baraka was, first of all, to defend themselves against these generals, soldiers, militias that were attacking their homes. Soon, it transformed itself into, oh, there is an economic advantage here. How about rooting their homes, the homes of Muslims? Finally, it came into, why don't we get rid of all the Muslims? And so what we had in 2013, the coup was in March 2013. What we had in 2013 was a religious war that had broken out in the Central African Republic, pitting Christians against Muslims. The anti-Barak militias were actually very violent, and so they chased out all the Muslims from their homes, looted their homes, and with different weapons, arming themselves with the traditional charms, they killed whoever Muslim that they came across. You might remember that in 2015, Pope Francis visited. At that time, there was a little bit of lull in the fighting, but as he went to the mosque and went to the Catholic Church, appealed the people to lay down their weapons and live in peace. In all, over 200,000 people, mostly Muslims, were killed, and about 1 million people, Muslims, went into exile. This religious war. Of course, what is going on is not a real religious war. Christians and Muslims had lived together peacefully for a long time, but one has to understand it within the context of the social history of this Central African Republic that was colonized by the French, and the French, because they found it impossible to control, they rented it out to trading companies so that we are extracting not only the wood, but the uranium, all the minerals. And after independence, this country has, in a way, experienced a naval coup d'etats. Some of you might remember 1965 when General Bedel Bokassa became president of that country, eventually crowned himself emperor, and he was then deposed in 1978. But a number of coup d'etats. But anyway, one has to understand this violence, this religious violence within that context. What I'm interested in are individuals and communities that were able within this context not only to resist violence, but also to found new communities made of Christians and Muslims. And that's the story that I want to begin with, the story of Father Bernard Kimvi, who is a chameleon priest, originally from Togo, who was ordained a priest in 2012 and assigned to the Central African Republic to open up a chameleon mission, and a mission that had a hospital, a school, and far in this area, far from Bangui, but the hospital was serving the only hospital in a radius of over 150 miles. So that is Father Bernard Kimvi, who, as I said, originated from Cameroon. Now, during the fighting, the hospital in Bosentale, where Father Kimvi is operating, became a place of refuge for all, Christians and Muslims. And the height of fighting, there were over 1,000 Muslim people that took refuge at the mission hospital, mostly women and children living under Father Kimvi's protection. During the fighting, fed the refugees, treated the wounded, both the Seleka and the Ant-Barak. He buried the dead. At the height of the fighting, actually, when the Ant-Barak realized that Father Kimvi was very sympathetic to the Muslims, some of the militias would actually go out in the villages to kill, and then they would call him and say, "Hey, Father, a few people that have been killed, we want to come and bury them? And they were going around boasting and say, we do our work and you do your work. We kill, you bury. That's the whole insanity that was going on. So in this context, he paid ransom for many of the Muslims that had been captured. Eventually, the Anti-Balaka realized that if they hold them captive, they might get some money out of the priest, and eventually helped to evacuate some of the Muslims into the neighboring countries. That is the story of Father Bernard Kinvi. Perhaps we see a little bit of
The Central African Republic is on the brink of genocide.
It's neighbor killing neighbor. Christians were going house to house, dragging people out of their houses, attacking them with machetes.
It is a scene of absolute brutality in the Central African Republic at the moment. Since 2013, sectarian violence in the Central African Republic has killed thousands of people and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. But in the midst of this brutal conflict, a human rights hero emerged. Father Bernard Kinvi provided a refuge for Muslims fleeing ruthless Christian militias, and he helped Human Rights Watch shine a spotlight on this forgotten conflict. In 2013, Muslim rebels known as the Seleka staged a violent coup and toppled the government of the Central African Republic. Once in power, they ruled through fear, targeting the mostly Christian population, burning down village after village, and executing civilians, including many women and children. In response, Christian militias banded together and began to take their revenge, brutally killing Muslims and driving them from their homes. The cycle of reprisals continues today.
Some of the clips that you brought back show truckloads of Muslims on the road. Tell me what is happening to the country's Muslim population.
All across the country, Muslim communities are facing a wave of vengeance and revenge, which is forcing them to flee the country in the hundreds of thousands.
C'est vous les musulmans, non? C'est vous le peuple là. On vous cherche pour le tuer.
The grounds of Father Bernard's church became one of the few sanctuaries in the country for Muslims. He and other members of his church placed themselves in front of the murderers' machetes to save lives.
On a toujours dit non, si vous voulez les tuer, tuez-nous d'abord. C'était avec sa maman, et dans leur fuite dans la brousse, c'est là que les anti-Balaka sont arrivés sur eux. Ils vont baisser, ils vont donner quelques coups de machette.
After a particularly brutal attack, Father Bernard spent days searching for Muslim survivors in the countryside.
Voilà un aussi qu'on avait récupéré dans la brousse. Oui. Il avait été menacé et puis finalement, il est resté au bord de la rivière pendant 3 jours, affamé. Et j'étais parti, je l'ai trouvé. Je voulais le prendre, mais il avait peur de moi.
Father Bernard has saved hundreds of people, giving them a safe haven, urgent medical care, and is helping to restore their faith in humanity. Without his relentless efforts, these victims would have continued to suffer and die in silence.
Pour donner de la vie à la population. Oui. Donc c'est pourquoi vous voyez, malgré tout, bon, on essaie de mettre de l'animation, que les maçons travaillent, que chacun retourne, les élèves retournent à l'école. Comme ça, il y aura de la vie, de l'activité.
That is Father Bernard Kinvi. Young priest, incredible work during this time. And for his work, he's received a number of awards actually. He's been recognized as a humanitarian hero. He was the winner of the 2014 Alison DeForge Human Rights Watch Award. In 2014, Time magazine named him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. and he was run-up to the Aurora Award in 2016 as a humanitarian hero. Of course, humanitarian does not capture the sense of what is going on and what he, Father Bernard Kinvi, is doing. One way to understand what he's doing is in a way to locate him within the story of the excess of God's love. In an interview, I asked him, why did you stay? You were not from the Central African Republic. You could have gone back to Togo. And actually, some of his superiors asked him whether he did want to leave. And his answer said, no, I could not leave because I am a chameleon priest. And as a chameleon priest, I took the vow of remaining with the sick and serving the sick, even with danger to one's life. I don't know whether many of you know about the chameleons. It's an order that was founded in Italy in the 16th century by Saint Camillus the Lille. And Camillus himself, as a young man, was an interesting man, a very unruly, a very disturbed young man, given to gambling and fighting. He joined the fighting, and where he was part of the fighting group, he got a wound in his left foot, and when the war ended, he was treated by the Capuchin fathers, and he actually wanted to become a Capuchin friar, and they took him in, but then the wound again came back, and he couldn't become a friar. So he left and went back to Rome, where again he was treated, but then the doctors declared his wound was incurable. And so he went to live in a hospital compound where there were other sick people who were also suffering from incurable diseases. And he noticed that the way the sick were being treated, and he realized that they needed better treatment. So he founded an order just to take care of the sick, especially during this time when there were many sick people in Europe because of the Black Death. And his argument was taking care of the sick and the poor is one way to get to the heart of God. In serving them, we serve Jesus Christ. He also said, the hospital is a house of God, a garden where the voices of the sick are music from heaven. And in the 19th century, again, as his order was growing, there was a lot of deaths because of the epidemics and the plague that disseminated a number of their orders. But they kind of continued in the spirit of St. Camillus to take care of the sick. And that is when they came up with a fourth vow. You know, all religious communities take 3 vows. So the Camillans took on a fourth vow, which is to serve the sick even with the danger of one's life. That is what Father Kinvi says. No, I took a vow. We have to serve the sick. But what he's getting to is that the sick, taking care of the sick, the poor, is one way to get to the heart of God. In other words, what is playing out in Bosentele, in the Central African Republic, is that excess of love, of God's love for the poor, for the sick, the weak, the marginalized. That is what he is playing out, the excess of God's love. I asked him in an interview, but why did you become a chameleon? Why did you become a priest? He said, well, I don't know, but I felt called to the chameleon order. I said, why? And he said, I don't know. He said, perhaps it was because of the suffering that myself experienced when I was a young boy, my little sister was 6, was electrocuted and died. And that was very, very painful. Then in 1993, my whole family was displaced for 6 months during the political crisis in Togo. We had to take refuge in the poor communities in the rural areas and be on the run for 6 months. Then when I was 18, my father got a stroke and became paralyzed. And I nursed him until he died for 1.5 years. And then he says, as I tended to him, I felt a desire to extend the same care to others. After his father died, he went to the hospital where he saw some nuns who were working there and asked them whether he could join their order. And they told him, no, we are only an order for women. But we take you to where there is an order for men that work in the hospital. So they took him to Benin, across the border to Benin, and introduced him to the chameleons. That is how he became a chameleon. There is something about the tenderizing of his own heart through the experiences of suffering and tending his sick dad that in a way softened his heart, but also at the same time enlarged it. In tending to him, I felt a desire to extend the same care to others. Tenderness, which is at the same time compassion, suffering with. A new community emerges in the Central African Republic during this time. Christians are killing Muslims. One cannot even imagine a community where Christians and Muslims can live together, except at this mission hospital in Bosentele. Now the fighting has died down, a new constitution has been made, a new president has been elected, there is some peace in the Central African Republic. However, remember what is interesting, some of the refugees have stayed. Among the refugees that have stayed at this mission hospital is an old imam who does not want to go back to his village. He's decided to stay at the mission hospital. The imam was also a tailor, and so he's contributing to the mission of the church by sewing uniforms for the school children. In the mission compound also, there is that young boy you might have seen who was also completely traumatized. He also lives at the mission compound. Also, 2 Muslim girls with polio, they live at the mission compound. It's an incredible new community in a way that has emerged in this Catholic mission, in this hospital. Talk about the church as a mission hospital. But I know that might be a story for another time. But you can see in the story of Father Bernard Kimvi these elements in a way coming together. That is the first story that I wanted to share. The second story that I wanted to share is from Burundi. Actually, it's a mistake here. This is Rwanda. Burundi is the one next down. Both of them are very small, tiny countries, south of Uganda, next to Tanzania here, and the huge Democratic Republic of the Congo. This is Burundi, a very troubled nation, where especially the ethnic identities, Hutu and Tutsi, have a number of years been fighting for power. It's almost the mirror image of Rwanda. beautiful small country, 11 million people, mostly Catholic, even poorer than the Central African Republic. I don't think we have the time to go into the social history that kind of makes Burundi even thinkable and all this violence that is going on. In 1993, the first Hutu, and the Hutu are the majority, the Tutsi are the minority, the first Hutu elected president was killed in a plane crash. And the Hutu suspect that the Tutsis had killed their president, and so they set out to revenge. And so the revenge killings are going on back and forth. In a small village here in Ruhigi, close to the border with Tanzania, is the story of a woman that I want to share, Maggie Barankise of Mezo Shalom. And I won't go into the details because she's coming to Notre Dame. And I hope you all can be there when she comes to speak at Notre Dame on April the 10th at 7 p.m. in the evening. She is, in my estimation, one of the most incredible human beings that I have met. Definitely one of the most dynamic Catholic women leaders out of Africa. Some have even referred to her as the Mother Teresa of Africa. Maggie is Tutsi. 1993, she was secretary in the bishop's compound. She had adopted 7 children, 4 Hutu, 3 Tutsi, and were living together. In the killings, she took refuge in the bishop's house with her children, but then her community, looking for Hutus, came to the bishop's house and started killing over 70 people that were killed. I don't know how much time there is. Perhaps we can get a little bit into her story through. She's the winner of the Opus Prize 2008, and this is just give you a little sense of her story.
At a mass grave in eastern Burundi, Maggie Barankitsi remembers the unthinkable. It happened in 1993 at the Catholic bishop's residence where she worked.
It's very hard.
As ethnic violence exploded across the country, men with machetes invaded and unleashed a nightmare, separating ethnic Hutu people from ethnic Tutsis.
They took off my clothes and then they tied me and they said, "Your punishment, that you keep silence, we will kill them in front of you." They began to kill priests, nuns, all the Hutu they know.
When the bloodbath was over, 72 people were dead.
And I stayed alone among those bodies. I don't want to go.
Over the following days, she risked her life to bury the victims.
You can't imagine. 15 years after, I still wondering why. Why?
What do you do after something so horrific? For Maggie, the answer was extraordinary.
I am Christian, and I know that our human vocation is to love. I will try to make new generation Hutu and Tutsi together.
As a war unfolded that would last 12 years and take 300,000 lives, she gathered orphans, dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands as her own.
I took those children with confidence because I believe that God is God. He will help me.
Maggie established Maison Shalom, the House of Peace, to restore these children. Her belief was that they needed education and love. And despite all they'd lost, a real home. So her children lived not in orphanages, but in houses, caring for each other in small groups, living as a family.
They have a future because it's their home. They have, when they leave school, they said, we go home.
Throughout the war, they lived as a testament to peace. Maggie's children worked together in businesses they own and run, including a salon, a tailor and seamstress shop, a mechanics school called the Garage of Angels, where former child soldiers, street children, and war orphans learn a skill and earn a living. Even their teacher is a child of Maison Shalom.
I can't imagine what I would have become because of the war, but everything I am now is thanks to Maison Shalom.
Over the years, Maggie added a library, language classes, computer lessons. And to prove to the children they deserved more than just survival, she built them a cinema and opened a swimming pool.
Shalom was born to say no to the war, to say yes to the love, yes to the life.
With Maggie, Maison Shalom is open to everyone so that healing, even in unspeakable circumstances, can truly take place. Aline's family was killed in the war. When she was only 5, rebel soldiers attacked her with machetes and rocks and left her for dead. Maggie raised Aline, helped her start a business, and nurtured her spirit with the lessons of Maison Shalom.
I can forgive because I was raised with so much love. God forgives my sins, so how can I not forgive those who hurt me?
Reconciliation and forgiveness run deep at Maison Shalom, a place where Albert, a Hutu, and Mediatrice, a Tutsi, can grow up as brother and sister.
God created us to be equal and not to be separated by ethnicity. So at Maison Shalom, we all live as children of God.
One of Maggie's biggest dreams is just now coming true. A new hospital, open to all regardless of their ability to pay. There will be fewer orphans, she says, and a brighter future if mothers are cared for right now. New operating rooms are under construction. A nursing school is almost finished. Ambulance service is available for the first time ever. Maggie encourages all, including mothers living with HIV, to stand up, work hard, and support one another.
I believe in this dignity that God gives us. We want peace. We want love. We believe in that.
Maggie says love has made her an inventor, so she's never married, never confined herself to traditional limits.
Woman must stay home, behind, not in front. And Maggie going in front.
I pray for Maggie, and I thank God for her.
Que Dieu bénisse Maggie.
I wish we had mamas like Maggie all over Burundi.
Most people in Burundi live on less than $1 a day. But Maggie insists it is not a poor country, but rich with promise. Her life is God's, she says. Her work has touched more than 30,000 children.
They rebuilt my heart. They give me hope.
She is the living proof of what one person of faith can do to bring peace and hope to the world.
I know that evil will never take the last word. Never, never. A new generation is coming. I am not a dreamer. No, no, it's real. We are one family, one human family.
I am not a dreamer. It is real. A new family, a new community.
She calls it Maison Shalom.
Oh my goodness.
It's here in the Burundian village of Ruigi that Maggie Barankitsi has transformed the lives of 30,000 orphans. Maggie has rejected Burundi's past of ethnic hatred, poverty, and genocide.
Sorry about that. It is real. A new generation is here. But it's all grounded in love. A love for Maggie that grew out of a very painful experience of witnessing the murder of these 72 people, including her best friend, who before she died brought her children to Maggie and said, "Look after my children." And so Maggie is emerging out of that, crying, goes to the sacristy, crying, why? And then she discovered that her children actually miraculously had survived. And then she said, out of that painful experience, however, I felt a strong courage. I felt a strong love and a determination to raise up a new generation in the love of God. Love is our true identity. We are made in love for love. That is God's identity. We are therefore not Hutu or Tutsi in the first place. Our primary identity is that we are princes and princesses in the household of God. Maison Shalom, house of peace. Maison Dieu, house of God. Princes and princesses in the house of God. And it's this love actually that has made me a rebel, saying no to war, to violence, to hatred, the kind of courage that is coming out of that excess love. But it's also the love that has made me an inventor. And so she's kind of inventing. We have salons, the businesses for the kids, the garage, and farms, so many businesses, as you say, including a cinema. A cinema in Burundi. The capital of Burundi is Bujumbura here by the lake. Ruhigi is a very remote country. How can you explain a cinema in the midst of this very poor country? And a swimming pool, for God's sake, a swimming pool in Ruhigi. As far as I can know, as far as I know, and I have done a lot of traveling in Burundi, as far as I can tell, there are two swimming places in Burundi. One, at this beautiful resort hotel Club du Lac, owned by the Belgians. And the second one, yes, you guessed right, in Ruhigi, for these kids, the orphans. But of course, for Maggie, they are not orphans. There are no orphans in the household of God that teems with that excess of love. All of us are princes and princesses in the household of God. And the children everywhere deserve the same excessive love. The children in Africa deserve the same excessive love as the children in America. That is what keeps her inventing. A hospital, one of the most beautiful, cleanest hospitals in Africa. And a new community that emerges out of that. She has raised over 25,000 children in this new community. And when you ask the children, so are you Hutu, are you Tutsi? Say, no, we are not Hutu. And so what are you? We are Hutu, Tutsi, Twa, Congo, Zungu, everything. It's a new community, an old community, an old communion, but is born in and through the tenderness of compassion, of suffering. There is much that we can say about these two, Kinvi and Maggie. But what do those two have in common? What is going on within both lives? One, the excess of love that is displayed in both of their lives. Not in the first place their own excess of love, but that the excess of God's love that is reflected in their own lives. The excess of love that they are in a way determined to perform out in their own lives and initiatives. Secondly, that this excess of love is born out of suffering, out of the tenderizing of their own hearts, that expands their own heart in a way, but expands also their sense of who are my people. Embracing especially the weak, the poor, the suffering others. This is the compassion of that excess of love. Thirdly, the compassion is at the same time a form of fiery advocacy, fiery an ongoing work, especially on behalf of the others, the weak, the poor, the suffering. Fourthly, a new and odd communion and community that emerges out of that. Number 5, this is about hope. If you ask me, this is what gives me hope about Africa. Stories like these are what gives me hope in relation to Africa. But that eventually actually speak not only to these kind of isolated cases, that eventually speak to what I see as a revolution of tenderness. A revolution of tenderness that, as Pope Francis reminds us, is the theme of the gospel, is the reason Christ became human. And so I conclude with this passage from Evangelii Gaudium, the Pope's exhortation on the joy of the gospel. The gospel tells us constantly to run the risk of face-to-face encounter with others, with their physical presence which challenges us, with their pain and their pleas, with their joy which infects us in our close and continuous interaction. True faith in the incarnate Son of God is inseparable from self-giving, from membership in the community, from service, from reconciliation with others. The Son of God, by becoming flesh, summoned us to the revolution of tenderness. The Son of God, by becoming flesh, has invited us to this revolution of tenderness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Katongole. We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers, and then we will have a little reception out in the lobby. So we have a traveling mic there for question and answer. So please ask your question into the microphone. Thank you.
Or a comment even.
Or a comment. He welcomes comments as well.
St. Mary's student. And I know that it's better for the students to ask or speak. But Father, thank you very much for being here and for your comments tonight. And it's nice to see you in the community. My question reflects on our situation here in the United States. As you referred to that in your opening remarks, how this situation and these stories have their counterparts here in the United States. So one of your very special talents is your ability to work towards healing of these conflicts. And in our studies of race in the United States, we too find that the conversations stop when we explore the problems, but we don't find the solutions. So I would ask you for some comments on the healing process, that we might use those here in America as well. Healing seems to be fleeting our comprehension, and we'd like to have your advice, if you could. Please speak to healing for racial issues in this country, gender issues, and class issues as well. So interact. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for the comment or question. I know Father Brian Masangelo was here 2-3 weeks ago, and I think he addressed similar questions about racial reconciliation in America and the lack. I think from what I read, he was really expressing also the frustration as like we haven't moved forward from the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. Where is the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about 44? So healing, I think most of the time when we think about healing, we think about, okay, we are broken, but let's get healed and stay where we are. So we want to be healed, but remain where we are. The kind of stories that I'm looking at and realizing, the healing that is going on, if we may use the term healing, but what is going on in places like Bosentele or Ruhigi is a complete transformation of everyone, and the invitation into a kind of odd space, if you like, an odd community, that Muslim and Catholics and Christians living together, Hutu, Tutsi, Twa living together. That's a different type of healing. That actually speaks more to transformation, because healing usually kind of say, you heal me so I can return to my old way of life. What I see going on here is a kind of transformation. And I think what many people have noted about America post-civil rights movement is that whereas we might have received the civil rights and so forth, the country has received very little in terms of the transformation. And the transformation, I think, happens in terms of spaces, communities, where you can see black and white sharing life. But to the extent that we are lacking those, we can talk all we want about healing, but I don't think that kind of gets into the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. For him, the beloved community was the ability for the enemy and the victim to live together. And that's why he fought so much against the violence. Because violence, if we resort to violence, that means we exclude the possibility of a new community whereby the victim and the perpetrator can live together. So I think in terms of healing, what is really the challenge of our time is to kind of create these spaces, these odd communities in which black and white can share life together. The challenge that I see is, if what I'm sharing here is right, there has to be a tenderizing of the heart in order even to move us there. And there is something about pain and suffering in a way, to the extent that we keep it at bay, that we don't really get into, of course we don't want to suffer and so forth, but there is something about communities that have experienced pain and suffering in a way that are more open, actually, to that kind of transformation. So I don't know what that means in terms of the concrete work that we need to do to get there. But I don't think there can be any healing, any transformation without these kind of odd spaces that are created in the midst of these estranged identities of being Hutu, Tutsi, black, white. That's all I can say right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
As you know, I took a group of students in spring break to Austria to look into the situation of refugees. And I wonder how you can translate tenderness into politics. These stories are about individuals, remarkable individuals, staying where they are and then making a difference. How can you translate that, the tendering of the heart, into politics and make it structurally relevant? Any wisdom on that?
Wow. What do you think? I had these kind of questions when the person asking you is a professor who knows the answers, and and I would like actually to hear what you think about this. I don't think I want to make a clear-cut distinction between the politics and these kind of lives. These are very political lives. What they are doing here is very, very, very political. And my hope is that it not only ignites and catches on, they talk about the revolution of tenderness, that it catches on, and we kind of all see the invitation it is to live within those kind of spaces. But in terms of the kind of the kind of politics, I really don't know. But let me just share a little bit something that I didn't share, because I know you are going to come to April the 10th at Notre Dame, 7 p.m. The Battle Hall 102, where Maggie Baranki is speaking. But let me share this. What he did in Ruhigi became a threat to the government. So when President Nkurunziza wanted to remain in power, changing the constitution, Maggie, these kids of Maggie and so forth had started a radio station, they started playing songs, they started calling advocacy, respecting the constitution and so forth. What the president did actually is to put Maggie on #1 hit list. And so she had to flee. She's now living in exile. The government had to close down Maison Shalom. The government had to close down Maison, killed a number of the kids. Why? There is a very political threat that the powers be see in initiatives like this. And in a way, what I've found encouraging, how that has actually emboldened, how that can encourage people like Maggie to keep on, to continue, because they realize that actually their work matters even more, because it's not just kind of touching these individual lives, it is the soul of the nation that now is being fought after. So there is a lot of political work that is being done there. But in terms of these kind of macro levels of politics, of policy, I don't know. I hope perhaps that is where what it means to be church is important. If church we can become serious about this invitation into a revolution of tenderness that begins in very specific concrete places like Bosentles and the Ruhigis of this world, in different communities around the nation. I think that would have necessarily an impact on the politics. But without those kind of communities, then politics just becomes, on that national level, becomes just a kind of a will to power and just a kind of change of presidents because of certain kind of orientations. Then it becomes just a fight between conservatives and liberals, and it becomes, in my opinion, uninspiring. Politics becomes uninspiring because it is not grounded in very concrete spaces and communities. But we can talk more. I'm sure you have. There's a lot to say about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for your talk. I am particularly interested with two things. One, like what we have seen or what we see in South Sudan, it is power related, and most of the focus is on the people who are fighting. And like your talk will also address the people. And I'm wondering, how well does your message go to the people like the leaders, and how well do they get to know through people like you how to deal with the situation on the ground? Because most of the time we address the citizen, but we have, as much as they have a say on what is happening, because they are the ones who fight among themselves, the government too has a say in what is happening. Mostly they stir up these fights. So what do you have to do or to say, or how well does your message reach to the leaders of the respective nations? Thank you.
Well, I do hope it does eventually reach to the leaders. But let's just talk very briefly about the case for Sudan. The case for Sudan was I had already foreseen that something that like that actually might happen. That the Nuer and Dinka eventually, after the fighting Khartoum government, the Muslim nation of Khartoum, that was going to turn inward, and then they begin to fight each other. And all along, I've been pointing out stories and examples, like, for example, Bishop Palidi Taban in South Sudan, who worked a lot actually to achieve the comprehensive peace agreement. He traveled to Washington, to European capitals a number of times, advocating for the comprehensive peace agreement, Bishop of Tolet. And when the peace agreement was signed, he resigned as bishop. He said he needed to resign. But everybody says, why? Because I'd worked so much with the refugees, and so why didn't he need to resign? It's because he said he had a dream. And his dream was to go in one of the remotest parts of southern Sudan and found a peace village. And so he founded this peace village in which Muslims, Christians, traditionalists, pastoralists, Nuer, Pokot, Dinka, different community tribes and so forth lived together as an experiment of how Sudan, South Sudan, needs to, as the vision of a new community. And he called the community, the peace village, Holy Trinity Peace Village. Because the image of the Trinity, three persons, one God, working together in a harmonious relationship, is what inspired him. Talk about performing theology, very, very concrete. I had never actually understood the notion of the Trinity until Bishop Taban's village. That made sense to me. That the Trinity is not just kind of a belief. Do you believe in three persons, one God, and so forth? The Trinity is a social doctrine. The Trinity is a social theory that has to be implemented, put in practice. That the Trinity is about community. And so he implements that by kind of setting up this cooperative village, bringing together as the vision, as the image of a new people. And I already mentioned that this is what not only Sudan, but Africa, the world, everywhere, needs these kind of communities in a way that kind of represent a new communion that is neither Greek nor Jew. That is what the gospel is about. So, sharing stories like Bishop Taban. Many people from South Sudan actually had not even heard about Bishop Taban, but in our gathering at the Institute in the Great Lakes region, when I invited Taban and shared his story with the people from South Sudan, said, oh, we didn't know that something like this existed. And so there are people now going to the peace village, and actually the government recently, I heard that they invited some of the warring parties to go and spend some time in the peace village and begin to talk about peace. My hope is that stories like these, in a way, inspire and offer alternatives to the struggle, to the fighting that is ongoing. So one way that we can do this is, or one way that you ask me a personal question, one way that I've tried to do this is when I was Duke and heading the Center for Reconciliation, we started this initiative called the Great Lakes Initiative in Eastern Africa, the Great Lakes. So bring together 7 countries around the Great Lakes: Rwanda, Congo, Burundi, South Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, every year in an institute to kind of really challenge ourselves what is going on in our region. And one gift that we offer at that institute is to share stories that become models and inspirations. And I've been encouraged in a way to see that some of these stories continue to be shared, but also people from, for example, the Sudan have been to Mezo Shalom in Burundi, have gone to Benin in Congo, where such incredible exemplars of hope are. I guess that's one small contribution towards peace in the region. Yes, sir.
I remember in one other class I took beforehand, we were learning about terrorism, and apparently there was a situation in the Philippines where there were peaceful protesters, and their leader was like, hey, kill them all, and the soldiers were like, no way, we're not going to shoot, peaceful protesters.
Can you hold the microphone a little further away from your mouth?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This better?
That's better.
Okay. And the thing is, would it be more possible to get something like that around in the world, or is that just one of those rare instances where the soldiers, will stand up to the leaders and be like, hey, we're not here to, basically, kill people because you want them dead, and obviously that's what changes the world. Do you think that sort of stuff could happen in real life, or is it more often, or is it like less and less?
Yeah, I think more often than we think, actually. I think there are more stories like these everywhere, in Africa, in the Philippines, in the US. I think there are more. We don't tell them, either because we do not see them, or because we think they're too small. You're talking about this mission hospital in Bosentele, in the middle of the Central African Republic. When we talk about the Central African Republic, we want things that happen in Bangui. Bangui is the capital. When we think about Burundi, we want things that happen in Bujumbura. That is the way to change power. That is the way to change systems. So our minds, in a way, have kind of been trained to think about, if it's happening in South Bend, that's not important. We need things that happen in Washington, D.C. That is the way to change. I'm saying, actually, no. This is very, very significant in terms of changing the way we even understand what is going on in the world and what does hope look like. So I think it is happening. I think more of these are happening, not only in Africa, but in other places, in the US. My point, my hope in sharing these stories about Africa is not to continue to perpetuate the sense that, war, violence, they are out there in Africa, in Asia. But here, it's different. My sense in sharing these stories is that they can, in a way, enliven your own imagination to begin to see, where do I see something like that here in the US? Where do I see these elements, for example, of excess of love, of tenderness, of compassion, and a new community in the midst of hatred, in the midst of war, in the midst of fear, for example, the fear of the other, of the refugee, of the Mexican? Where do I see something like this? This was my hope, and this is still my hope why I shared this story. I don't want to deflect away from the work here to just kind of say, African, they are always fighting. I want actually to take stories like this seriously so that we can say, maybe there is something like these elements at work in the world here. And where have you seen them? So my sense in sharing these stories is to give you homework. Go, find these kind of stories, find these kind of communities, find these elements of compassion, of tenderness, of excess of love, and new community in your neighborhood. Here at St. Mary's, where do you see something like this at work? That is my whole point in sharing these stories. And looks like we have a lot of homework to do. One more question here.
Okay, I understand we're running out of time, so I'm going to make it really quick. I came here tonight because I'm really trying to understand the violence. We see a tremendous amount of violence, news stories coming out of Africa. What's driving that? Is it more tribal or ethnic, or is it more related to religious, in the two main religious groups? And of the two groups, what percentage of the general population really identify with one or the other? I mean, I asked that question wanting to kind of get to a sense of what really drives these tremendous problems, and if maybe we could get to that point, we could maybe come to some idea how we could maybe, as people from outside that environment, bring some sort of help.
what is driving it, underlying driver is politics. Politics is, and the story that I didn't go, each one of these, we could spend a whole session talking about how do you understand the Central African Republic, for example, why there was this religious war between Christians and Muslims. You cannot understand that without the history of the Central African Republic. The Central African Republic that first of all began as a territory where all these sultans were raiding and selling slaves from. And then in the 19th century, the French, it was given to the French as a territory. They found it impossible to rule, so they rented it out to trading companies that were paying taxes to France for these territories. And France, on top of that, imposed levied a tax on each individual. So all these people were paying tax to France. Has France from the very start, has the sultans from the very start, ever been interested in the people as a people? No, of course, except as a source of revenue. Then independence comes. Of course, France is out of the picture. Then we have African leaders. Bokassa, the story of Bokassa, who crowned himself emperor, who hired plain lords of China and Champagne from France. Why? His hero was Napoleon. He was a general in the French army. He's African, of course. But his imagination, his hero, is Napoleon. Has he ever cared about these communities? No. And then coup after coup, fighting for power. The ordinary people in the Central African Republic, this map of the Central African Republic, are going on with their life, trying to do the best they can. Peasants. And the word peasants, of course, in Africa means they don't matter. The same with Burundi. What matters is to capture Bangui, the capital, and share the spoils of these territories. All these generals that have been disenfranchised from the government, some in Chad, some in Sudan, they come together here, this region, they start the coalition, the Sereka. They move through this area territory quickly. Why? Going where? To Bangui, capture the capital. They capture the capital, and then they start spanning out, again control, and started looting. And that they happen to be Muslim is incidental. That's not the most important thing. So, but what we see in 2013, we say a religious war has broken out between Muslims and Christians. It's like Christians and Muslims in Africa always are killing one another. There have never been such a war in Central African Republic all these years. But it's a political struggle in a way, masquerading, if you like, under these names. So, in other words, we need to take politics seriously. And perhaps that's the point that Clemens is asking. We need to take politics seriously. And how politics, in a way, frames who we are, who my people are, and who the enemy is. But that's not only true in Africa. Here, we need to take politics seriously here. I think the greatest challenge that we have now in America is that we have not been taking politics seriously. American population has become the most politically passive population in a way. We wait for every 4 years to cast a vote. But for the rest, the kind of the political work of formation of communities in a way that kind of live according to certain ideals has been in a way, if you like, sought out to interest groups as long as people make money. I think that's what the challenge. The challenge is not on Africa. I think it's good to focus on Africa, but I want to deflate that question, to throw that question to you. What is the significance of politics here? What are the alternatives in a way that we can live with that kind of excess of love? Have you seen anything like an excess of love here? Where? And how is it formed? What kind of communities does it form? Are those kind of an alternative to the fear-mongering that is going on or that goes on in our politics? I think it is good to talk about Africa and think about Africa, but that was not my point actually. I don't want us to spend so much time talking about Africa. I want to talk about us here and these kind of elements as they play out, or what has this story that we have seen and heard about Africa, what does it say about us here? Africa will sort itself out. Africa will sort itself out. There is hope. People like Maggie, like Kimvi, and others, we can give more it away. But I think the primary task that I feel is kind of to bring together this discussion of spirituality, of solidarity, of non-violence, and how it can inspire our lives going forward. I think all that I want to say is that politics matters, and matters greatly. Not in terms just of only of changing regimes and so forth, but in terms of forming these communities out of this tenderness of heart that the gospel is about. And for us Christians, I think that is the invitation that has been laid out for us.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank Father Katongole one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think you're one of the people that give us hope, and just delighted to be with you tonight. If you didn't catch the Maggie Berenkitse lecture, it is Monday, April 10th at 7 p.m. in DeBartolo
102.
And also the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's will be hosting